Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. Thank you. So I was introducing our presenters for today. So we'll have Craig Grisha, like I have mentioned, who is the Director for Monitoring in Africa Region, the Nature Conservancy. We have Richard Bugan, who is a Monitoring and Evaluation Manager for the Greater Cape Town Waterford, that is in South Africa. We have John Gathagu, our Knowledge and Management Coordinator for the Apatana Nairobi Waterford. And finally, Lois Abede, who is a Monitoring and Evaluation Officer for the Apatana Nairobi Waterford, which is in Kenya. So we'll have presentations first, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So I would like to remind everyone that you can put your questions in the chat to avoid maybe forgetting that. And also, if you would like to ask a question, you can type letter Q at the chat, and then we'll keep that in the tab that when we start the Q&A, you'll be given a chance to ask your question at the end. So thank you for that. And yes, thank you, Fred, for the reminder. The call has been recorded, so we'll be sending the recording after, together with the presentations from this webinar. So thank you, everyone. And we'll start with Lois. So Lois, when you are ready, let me know if I can help you share your screen or you would like to share from your side.
Thank you, Florence. Please project my presentation.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon,
Let me know if you
everyone.
can see it.
Can see it. Thank you, Florence.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lois Abende. I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer for the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund, and I'll be making a presentation on the M&D frameworks. Thank you, Florence. Please, let's go to the next slide. Yes, so I'll begin by giving a brief introduction and defining what M&D is. So M in M&D is monitoring and E is evaluation. Monitoring is an ongoing process of data of collecting information and reviewing that information with an aim of providing continuous feedback to various project staff. And this information has to track the efficiency of achieving program goals and objectives. Another name for monitoring is process evaluation. And it basically, as I've said, measures how well our program activities are being performed. Evaluation, on the other hand, is a rigorous, systematic process that helps a program determine the extent to which service needs and results are being achieved and analyzed. And then also, if there are any discrepancies, then this is the point to explain those discrepancies and give reasons for them. Next slide, Florence. So what is monitoring and evaluation? I use this pictorial, and we have, from the picture, from the comic, we have someone who's trying to explain the logic as to why the framework for his house is good. So he says that, so I've used plastic tubes and rubber bands, and these plastic tubes and rubber bands, why I've used them is because they're very flexible. And his reasoning is that his house will never break. And the lady, after looking at that framework, notifies him that she thinks that the house is, both the framework and the argument are both bad. So if you look at the framework that our friend has shared with us, for a house, it would be argued that, clearly this is not, it's really not good. It's really not strong enough to support a house, whether you're using bricks or some metal to reinforce the the frame. So this is a classic example of, how not to do a framework. So what is a framework? A general definition for a framework is that it's a basic structure that underlies a system or a concept or a project. In this case, for the M&E framework, it's a basic structure that underlies any project or program. It is important for us to have clear frameworks that guide monitoring and evaluation. This basically lays out the components of the initiative and the order of steps needed to achieve the desired results. So it needs to be clear how you're going to achieve your objectives from one step to another. So M&E frameworks can be projected it can either be a model, a picture, or a map.
When we now come to our country here, there's a problem. And where there's a problem, you see that there's a problem. We are not able as a country to market our
Sorry, can you mute?
to individually, as farmers, to market the state products. And that is a very serious problem.
Florence, if you can meet Honorable Frederick, I'll reach him and let him know that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Okay, I was on this slide. Please project it. Thank you. So frameworks generally are borrowed from the social sciences, and they can be presented either as models, pictures, or maps, and they're helpful tools for planning programs and specific interventions, including research and M&E. So you can visualize the factors that drive an intervention. And you can also use maps to illustrate how a program should work. And also finally, you can use the frameworks to identify relationships between factors that influence program operation and the successful achievement of objectives. So for example, in the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund, our main goal is to improve water quality and water quantity. So if we are to, one way of projecting or showing how our work is being done is, for example, we could give a relationship of how construction of a road can affect our final outcomes. So that can be clearly shown when you're using a framework. The next slide, that slide, thank you, Florence. How do we use M&E frameworks? The first purpose for an M&E framework is it's a framework. An M&E framework can be used for communication and planning. So it will clarify various assumptions, goals, interrelationship among factors relevant to the project or the program. It will also define levels of performance and desired results in terms of planned activities and realistic objective impacts. Monitoring and evaluation frameworks, as you're working on your monitoring and evaluation framework, one thing that you should keep in mind is that you need to incorporate program managers' assumptions and objectives, in that it's just not the work of the M&E person to develop the framework. It should be an all-inclusive process, and we should make sure that all the relevant stakeholders are involved. So it shows another use for the M&E framework is that it gives you a link between resources and activities. What inputs do you need to achieve specific, so that you can do a specific activity? And then it also acts as a roadmap to guide the program towards achieving a goal. And then it also helps in selection of indicators. Next slide, Florence. So we have 6 steps when we are developing an M&E framework. So these are 6 standard steps. The first step is you need to first of all determine the purposes of the monitoring and evaluation mechanism and assess the information needs of each actor. Step number 2 is to clearly define your objectives, outputs, and your indicators. So when you're defining your objectives, for example, you have to make sure that your objectives are SMART. So they should be specific, measurable, realistic, and time-bound. And then your outputs also must be outputs that can be easily, or not really easily achieved, but they should be achievable. And then finally, your indicators are those components of your project that guide you and lets you know if you're doing well. So basically, these are milestones, and they help to inform project staff on how well they are doing in terms of achievement of various milestones. The third step is to establish a coordinated and common reporting tool or tools. So we should ensure that at this point, as we are developing the framework, we are clear on what reporting tools we'll be using, the frequency of reporting, and those kinds of things. Step number 4 is to determine methods for obtaining information on indicators. So will you be doing surveys, or will you get this info? How will you basically get this information? Will you be getting them from secondary sources? So at this point, you need to be clear on where you'll be getting those your information. Step number 5 is to assign responsibilities, determine time frame and data collection frequency, and allocate resources. So from the beginning, you need to be clear on who will be doing what. If it's on reporting, you need to be clear on how frequently the project will be generating reports, and allocate the necessary resources for each of those activities that you've listed. The final step is to establish mechanisms for sharing information and incorporating results into intervention and response planning. So when you're developing an M&E framework, it's good to have it before the project starts. So you can do this even without resources. So it doesn't mean that let's say, for example, if you're still looking for funding, that you have to wait for, let's say, the whole amount of maybe $1 million to be available for you to develop an M&E framework. You can start with what you have and then continuously improve on the document. We have 4 common types of M&E frameworks. The first one is the logical framework. We have logic models, we have results frameworks, and we have finally conceptual framework. So I'll take you through all these 4. At this point, it's good to note that different donors, look for or require different types of logic models. Also, the kind of monitoring plan that you will have will call for maybe a specific model, as you'll see. So these models serve different purposes, and as we go through the presentation, I'll be able to show you that. The first one is the logical framework. So another name for this framework is a log frame matrix. They're similar to another framework that I'll take you through called a results matrix, in that both of them are project management tools, and they manage results. So a logical framework is basically a table which presents a standardized summary of the project and its logic. It illustrates the relationships between program inputs, processes, and outputs, and also links the program to the desired impacts. On your right, I've summarized this in a small table. You have the goal, you have your purpose, you have your component objectives, you have your outputs, and your activities. And then, so that's in terms of how you describe your project. And then you have your performance indicators. So you list all the indicators under each of the components, and then you must have a means of verification. And then also this framework also gives us assumptions that you are making for each of the items. So it summarizes what the project intends to do and how. So it gives you a roadmap on how you're going to achieve your objectives. And then it also gives you key assumptions, and it also highlights outputs and outcomes that will be monitored and evaluated. Next slide. A logic model is a diagram that identifies and illustrates the linear relationship flowing from program inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes. So the difference between this and the logical framework is that a logic model gives you a linear relationship. It explains to you that you'll need this particular input, and this input will give you this output, and this output will give you this outcome, and finally this outcome will lead to this particular impact. So it provides, the purpose for this is that it provides a streamlined interpretation of planned use of resources and desired ends. And then it also clarifies project or program assumptions about linear relationships between key factors relevant to the desired ends. A conceptual framework. I'm sure most of us have used this, especially when we're doing our projects in school, when we're writing up our thesis. A conceptual framework is also known as a theoretical or causal framework. It informs the program design by making explicit connections between relevant contextual factors and the purpose of the program. It clarifies the why and how questions of program operation and design. So basically that is the causal link between program activities and objectives, while defining the underlying assumptions made to achieving the goals. So the purpose of this is that it shows where the program fits into the wider context. It clarifies assumptions about causal relationships, shows how program components will operate to influence outcomes, guides identification of indicators, and finally, it guides impact analysis of causal pathways. So 4 things to look out for when you're designing a conceptual framework include the theory of change. You need to look at the range of potential exposures that people may have to the particular intervention that you're implementing. And then you also need to keep in mind a realistic time frame for change to occur. And finally, how will you measure that change? Finally, the results framework. It's sometimes also referred to as a strategic framework, and it illustrates the direct relationships between the intermediate results of activities all the way to the overall objectives and the goals. So basically the diagram on the right is shows you how our results framework looks like. And I know there's one of our participants in this call, Kevin, has used this in his project. So results framework, they form a basis for monitoring and evaluation activities at the objective level. So you're able, with the results framework, you're able to follow each result, you know, in sort of a flow diagram. You know, for example, if you're looking at improved income for farmers and smallholders, then, for example, a strategic objective would be improved use of certified seeds. So your first your first results can be, for example, on availability of those seeds. And then, so you, for each result, there are specific activities, outputs, and outcomes. So it's a linear, it shows a sort of a linear relationship. The next slide. And then finally, this is a summary comparing the 4 frameworks. And because of time, I'll just go to the last column. So out of these four frameworks, we have 3 that form the basis for monitoring and evaluation. You can use them at different levels of M&E, but for the conceptual framework, that helps you to explain your results. And finally, I picked this this saying. It's in Kiswahili. It says, "Haba na haba hujaza kibaba." So basically, in English, that means small things, when you combine them together, they make up big things. So all these inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes lead to the ultimate impact for projects. So no single component is enough to achieve the goal. A framework will help you to see how they work together and to guide you in monitoring and evaluating these components. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Lois. Again, I remind everyone, if you have a question, kindly type it in the chat or type letter Q in the chat, and then we'll get back to the questions at the end. So we'll go to the next presenter, who is Richard.
Thanks, Florence. You can see my screen, okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today about the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. As Florence said, my name is Richard Bugan, and I'm the M&E manager for the Nature Conservancy in South Africa. So just to give you some background on the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. So the Water Fund has prioritized the catchments around the main dams which supply water to the Cape Town region for the implementation of catchment restoration activities. And the restoration in this case involves the removal of thirsty invasive alien trees and subsequent restoration by native vegetation. Now, the main benefits of this restoration include water gains, obviously, and as well as increased biodiversity, and there's also significant socioeconomic impacts. And in my presentation today, I will mainly be focusing on the water gains that we are achieving through these restoration activities. So just to give you a point of reference and to show you where we are working. So the Water Fund has identified, as I said, the catchments of the major dams for restoration activities. And the major dams in this case, and I hope you can see my pointer, is Theewaterskloof Dam, the Berg River Dam, and the and the Wemmershoek Dam. So these are located about 100 kilometers east of Cape Town, in an area known as the Boland Mountains. So the Water Fund has prioritized all these catchments around these major dams as areas of intervention. But the Water Fund has also looked at an area on the west coast of South Africa, about 50 kilometers north of Cape Town, called the Atlantis Aquifer, and prioritized this area for intervention as well. So in my presentation, I'll be describing how we are quantifying the water benefits in both the Atlantis area, as well as these 7 priority subcatchment around these major dams. So tracking the water benefits of the interventions is one of the components of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund M&E plan. And this M&E plan was developed through the Greater Cape Town Water Fund Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group, which is really a group of experts and key role players from the catchment restoration sector in the Cape Town area. So one of the thematic areas I described is water, but we're also looking at biodiversity, both terrestrial and freshwater. We are looking at management and operational effectiveness, the socioeconomic impacts of our interventions, as well as partnership satisfaction. So for each of these thematic areas, we have defined the current state, or defined the problem that we are tackling. We have defined the ultimately desired state, or the outcome indicators. We have defined the output indicators which we would need to monitor to achieve that desired state. And the working group has proposed evaluation techniques to for each of these thematic areas, and also describe data collection and analysis. And very importantly, we've assigned roles and responsibilities for each of the thematic area. And as Lois mentioned in the previous presentation, we really followed a sort of a smart goal setting procedure in defining these desired states. So one of the outcomes of the M&E working group, and which is included in the M&E plan, is really these tables for each of the thematic area. And the way these statements are phrased was key to how we designed the monitoring network, or designed the monitoring and the evaluation. As I said, for each of the thematic areas, we've identified the current state as well as the desired state, and assigned responsibility for the thematic area. And in terms of the desired state, we looked at both the intermediate, sort of a short-term or medium-term desired state, and a long-term desired state. And the intermediate desired state coincides with a high impact phase for the water fund, which is the first 6 years of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. So the current state for the water thematic area, as well as the desired state, was informed through the application of hydrological models in the business case for the water fund. And these models showed us that currently 55 billion liters of water per year, or 55 million cubic meters, are lost due to the presence of these thirsty invasives across 54,300 hectares, which makes up the 7 priority subcatchments. And the models also indicated that these losses will double by 2045 if no action is taken. So we then identified an intermediate desired state, and that is that by 2025, we aim to reclaim the loss of this 55 billion liters by clearing the invasives across the 7 priority subcatchments, and also clearing invasives about 5,000 hectares on the Atlantis aquifer. And then we set ourselves also a long-term goal, which is to schedule and implement follow-up clearing and maintenance treatments. And that is very important, because the clearing is not a once-off activity, but includes maintenance and follow-up. So we would have to include this follow-up clearing and maintenance across the 7 priority subcatchments in order to maintain the water reclamation, so our efforts don't go to waste. And then by 2050, we aim to expand our activities to the remaining areas of the Western Cape water supply system, which is sort of the area which supplies water to the Cape Town region. And the Nature Conservancy is responsible for driving this thematic area. So in terms of the evaluation techniques which we are using to quantify the water gains in the priority subcatchment areas, we are using 2 techniques. So the first was derived through the application of the hydrological models, as I said, which was used in the business case. And through these models, we have established a relationship between the area that is being cleared, the density that is being cleared, and from that we can quantify how much additional yield is reclaimed into the system. So all we need is to know where the clearing is undertaken and the density of the invasions being cleared. But in an attempt to sort of validate this modeling exercise, and in a sense also to improve it, we have implemented these paired catchment experiments in the priority subcatchments. So we've incorporated 2 experimental designs. The first is the BACI paired catchment experiment, which is the before-after control impact paired catchment experiment. Now this experiment incorporates a control and an impact catchment, and it incorporates a before and an after period. So in the before period, both the control and the impact catchments are in the same state. So in this case, both the catchments are invaded with these invasive trees. And after a certain period, or the end of the before period, an intervention is applied in the impact catchment. And then you continue monitoring for the after period. So in the after period, you're able to directly quantify how much additional water is released through the removal of the invasives. And very importantly is that this method clearly allows us to attribute the actions or the impacts of the interventions. And what we are aiming to see here is not that the catchments in the before period that they are sort of behaving in a similar hydrological manner in terms of the volume of water observed, but that they follow the similar dynamics in sort of this parallel path. We've also incorporated a multiple catchment experiment, which also incorporates a control and an impact catchment, and also a before and after period in this case as well, but also a reference catchment. And this experiment also allows for attribution. And what we are aiming to see with this multiple catchment experiment is sort of evidence of converging of the hydrological conditions in the impact catchment towards reference conditions. So we went through an extensive catchment selection exercise to identify these paired catchments, and this included both desktop investigations as well as field-based investigations. And the selection criteria which we used included accessibility, which is very important because this is a long-term experiment. We looked at catchment physical properties such as the size, the orientation, the slope. We looked at geology and soil conditions. And very importantly, we had to identify the presence of stable bedrock controls where we would install our monitoring infrastructure. So through this catchment selection exercise, we identified 6 catchments or 3 paired catchments. So in the figure, these are enumerated as TWK1 and 2, and these catchments are both invaded currently. Catchments, the TOIS 1 and the TOIS 2 are also invaded currently. And then the catchments numbered MR1 and MR2 are represents reference conditions. So they are covered, or the land cover in this area is the native vegetation for the regions. So in each of these catchments, we have set up infrastructure to monitor the discharge or the stream flow in these catchments. And we're also monitoring the rainfall in these catchments using automatic logging equipment. So using different configurations of this, or different combinations of these catchments, we are able to set up the Backy paired catchment experiment and the control reference impact multiple catchment experiment. So this table really just summarizes the experimental design. As I said, we are using a control impact and the reference catchment in the Backy paired catchment experiment and the multiple catchment experiment. So at this stage, we envisage the before period to be about 3 years, but this may extend, and also the after period to also be about 3 years. So in the before period, as I said, the control and the impact catchment are both invaded, and will collect baseline data mainly associated with the vegetation conditions, and will monitor rainfall and stream flow volumes. After this before period, the intervention is applied in the impact catchment. And in this case, the intervention is the removal of the invasives, and we'll continue monitoring for further 3 years in this case of the rainflow and stream flow volumes. And subsequent to this, we'll apply the intervention in the controlled catchment as well, because the controlled catchment cannot remain invaded. Now, in terms of data analysis, things that we'll be looking at include sort of a regression analysis between the control and the impact catchments. We will study rainfall runoff relationships, and also look at volumes and flow duration curves, etc. So these images represent preliminary results from the TOIS 1 and the TOIS 2 catchments, which I showed you earlier. And these catchments are both currently invaded. So these results, we installed these equipment, the logging equipment, in October 2019, and we downloaded just before the lockdown in South Africa in March 2020. And the results represent the time series of water temperature in blue, of the water stage, which is in orange, the discharge, which is in black, the electrical conductivity of the water, which is in yellow, and the rainfall, which is in green. And all the logging is being undertaken at 10-minute intervals. So if you compare these two graphs, you'll immediately notice that there are variations when comparing the magnitudes of the stage and discharge between the Toys 1 and the Toys 2. You can see it's significantly higher in the Toys 1. But that is not the only thing that we are looking at here. And what is very important here, as I mentioned before, is this parallel path assumption, so that they are on a similar hydrological path or similar path in terms of their hydrological response. And you can see that both these catchments are responding at the same time to rainfall events, and they follow a similar pattern. So this is very encouraging for us going forward. Okay, so I spoke about the paired catchments now, so I'll be shifting to the Atlantis aquifer area. The Atlantis aquifer is actually a very interesting place because in Atlantis, they've been successfully operating a managed aquifer recharge scheme for about 4 decades now. So in this area, it's very important to sort of maximize the groundwater recharge in the area, because the area is partially dependent on groundwater for water supply purposes. But this area is also extensively invaded by invasive trees, and in this case, it's a species called Acacia saligna. And we targeted this area for intervention. And as you can see on the right here, this represents an image before clearing. You can see the Acacia saligna, and the same area after clearing, and you can see Table Mountain in the background. And because we are working in this area, we thought it would be very important to be able to actually quantify how much additional water is released to the aquifer through these clearing activities. So what we did was we set up an experiment where we aim to quantify the additional recharge to the system through the removal of the invasives. And what we did was we measured several parameters, which includes the water use of the invasives through a technique called the heat pulse velocity sap flow technique. We also monitored the water use of the indigenous vegetation through an eddy covariance system. We set up a weather station in the area, and we also monitored soil moisture conditions in the area. After all the monitoring, we fed all this information into an unsaturated zone model called HYDRIS 1D. And what HYDRIS does, it simulates all the water balance processes in the unsaturated zone, so sort of transpiration, evaporation, and root water uptake, the infiltration, etc. And one of the outputs of this model is this recharge flux, which is what we were hoping to quantify. So we applied this model in an area where the invasives occur, and an area that is characterized by the natural vegetation in the area. And these graphs represent the results, well, some of the results of the simulation. And it compares the fluxes observed at the bottom of the model domain in this case. So as I said, from an area occupied by the Acacia saligna, which is the invasives, and the fynbos, which is the native vegetation. So in this case, the negative fluxes is a directional indication, so that it represents the downward movement of water, and the positive fluxes represent water moving into the model domain. So what we were interested in is the negative fluxes, or the downward movement of water. And in terms of the downward movement of water, or this recharge flux, there's a significant difference between these two sites, between the invaded and the native vegetation area. And this difference was 83 millimeters of water over this annual period, which is about 830,000 liters per hectare, which is a significant amount of water. But I should also state that this was, the invasives were quite dense in this area, and this environment is not water limiting, so the trees had readily access to available water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was a good presentation. So in case you have any questions, remember to type it in the chat. We'll have a Q&A or questions and answer session at the end. Or type letter Q if you would like to ask your question verbally. And then we'll continue to the next presenter, who is John Gatagu. John?
Yeah, thank you, Florence, and thank you for having me. Let me know when you have my screen.
Yes, we can see it, John.
Thank you. So I'm going to take us through some of the technologies that we use in hydrological monitoring. And this is Nairobi Water Fund in summary. I would like you to take the next 5 seconds to look at it and see some of the activities that are being implemented in the Upper Tana watershed of the Tana River, the biggest river in the country. So what you realize is that every component in this graphic is water driven. The project goal is to ensure that these activities in the watershed contribute to increased river flows and improved water quality. And so to monitor the impacts of project activities on water and sediment yield, we installed 35 river gauging systems across the watershed as shown in the map. And these stations were strategically put in areas where the project is implementing its activities, the treatment sub-micro watersheds, and those that act as a control. So these are basically areas within the same hydrologic response unit, or rather areas that have the same land use, the soil and vegetation cover. And so they would respond, like Bugan said, to rainfall in more or less the same way. So what do we monitor in this? We would like to see how the water level respond with time, and specifically to be able to record more than 10% increase in dry season flow as a result of the project activities. So if we do our agroforestry, if we do our terraces, then how is that impacts, how are those impacts seen in terms of water levels or discharge in the rivers? We would also want to monitor trends in water quality to see that in 5 years, the project will have contributed to at least 10% reduction in sediment load in the rivers. And so we therefore measure parameters like turbidity and total suspended solids, and other parameters like temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, and electrical conductivity. And so at the end of the day, we analyze this data to inform or quantify the impacts of the project activities. I'm now going to take us through how we measure each of those parameters, water level, discharge, the water quality parameters, and how we analyze them. So we begin with water level. So this slide basically shows the different tools in water level measurement. So the first one is this one is particularly recorded by the gauge readers who note the water level every day in the morning or in the evening. And so in 1 month, we have that records that are made, and sometimes this is missed, especially during the high flows or the rain events, etc. And you actually would not want to imagine losing this particular piece of paper with these records. And when you wake up in the morning and you probably find that your kids have used this particular sheet of paper to write up fire, then you have lost all these records that probably may not be able to recover them. So we have upgraded these stations that have to have the manual gauge reading to hobble augers, which is basically this equipment that is inserted in this steering well, and it will automatically correct water on water level and temperature every 30 minutes. And in 1 month, therefore, you can calculate that, and you see it will have logged about 1,440 records, which basically means that more accuracy in hydrological modeling, And the logger will record both high flow and low flows, and in all weather, doesn't matter whether it was raining or whether it is at night. And it is therefore more accurate because it captures water level fluctuations during the day. So you can imagine if somebody was abstracting water immediately after the gauge reader had read the gauge, then that is not captured. But with this particular one, it's able to capture the fluctuation in water level based on whether it is being abstracted or based on rainfall. Now, stations whose data is required to make informed decision on a daily basis were further upgraded to telemetry using this particular equipment called an Ecolog 800. And the equipment logs and transmits data to a central database every 2 hours or at a user-defined interval. So if you want your data to come to your desk every 30 minutes, you just come and program it like you're trying to do here to send data every 30 minutes or 2 hours. If I may go back, so for this particular station, what this means for companies like Nairobi Water, for instance, is that we save a lot of money that would be incurred to have people go to the rivers to take readings and come back, say after 4 or 5 hours, because there are 6 of them and they have to be read daily to make informed decision. And when this data is delivered in that time, then probably it will only inform the manager whether to release more water for treatment or not, as you'll be able to see in the subsequent slides. So your project like ours might be tracking discharge. And so water levels recorded, or that's recorded in the last slide, must be converted to flow. And to facilitate such conversion, several gauging has to be conducted at different water levels to establish a rating curve or a rating equation for every river. And we use an acoustic Doppler velocimeter, which is this one for rivers that you can wade across. And we use an ADCP, an acoustic Doppler current profiler, for rivers that they are deep and you cannot wade across. So we have people on one end holding this rope and others on the other end. And as the equipment is moved along the stream or across the stream, then it records both the cross-sectional profile of this river. It will give you the average depth of the river, and it will also record the velocity of water, and then the discharge, what is that you are looking for. So in a matter of 10-15 minutes for each of these equipments, then you have gotten your discharge recorded. So water quality monitoring is conducted mainly during the rainfall season or rainfall events. And we do this to measure parameters like turbidity and the total suspended solids. And while in the field, we use a portable turbidimeter to measure turbidity. And we also use a HANA multiparameter to measure other indicative parameters like the total dissolved solids, the dissolved oxygen, electric conductivity, and salinity. So basically, when you have activities that are happening upstream and people are applying more fertilizers on the other, then they would reflect on the water quality as high EC or electric conductivity. So using this particular equipment, you're able to see the trends in such parameters. So we have also installed a telemetric turbidimeter here that records both water level and turbidity, and would transmit them at a user-defined interval. And so this is critical for systems where abrupt change in water turbidity would result to disruption in the system. And the equipment is powered by a solar system. So all this data will require a central database to be processed, to be analyzed, and plotted for visualization. And we finalized the customization of this particular tool called the DHIS, the District Health Information Tool. And this particular dashboard, for instance, communicates to the project manager looking at the trends of water of turbidity, for instance, in this is a treatment micro catchment where the project activities is implementing its activities, and this is where there's a control where the project is not implementing its activities. And so the project manager will look at when we started implementing the activities in 2016 and probably reach to a conclusion that yes, we have a declining trends in turbidity. And then looking at the other one, there is like an increase in trends in turbidity in the same catchment. So what is the decision sought? Are the project activities working? Yes. And so then he will look for more or give us more money so that then we are able to scale up these activities to these other micro watershed. So there's a sort of decision-making dashboard that comes in when the data is plotted into the tool. So we are also using other tools like Power BI, as because used in the finance sector. So the Power BI tools is used to process telemetry data whose visualization in daily, sometimes in hourly, is critical. And Power BI provides an interactive visual where variation and relationship between parameters are shown. So for instance, in the graph on January 13th, just a random date that the water level, there was a decline in water level, and then at this particular day, the water level rises. And this is what is seen on a screen. And the water manager would want to know what actually happened. So clicking on that particular day, this is how the water levels were changing that day. So he is able to see that 9 a.m., and this is actually the date that the gauge read, at the time the gauge readers take their readings at 9 a.m., there was a water level of 0.41. So if this was the gauge readers information would read 0.41, the manager would assume, if the gauge readers data was to be taken into account here, that yes, it is a good time for us to cross the outlets of our reservoir so that we can have more water filling in the dam. But looking at this, then he is able to see that 2 hours after 9 a.m., the water levels actually started going down. So then he makes another decision that you have now to let in water go to the treatment unit. So this, the beauty of it, that the decisions are made on hourly basis, and it can be shown whether the impact of this is a result of rainfall or other factors. So if, for instance, the rainfall here on this particular day reads 0, and the manager sees this increase in water level, then there is something that has to be triggered. Maybe something is happening upstream or etc. So this dashboard actually was used during last high flows, and there was a growing concern of when the dam would fill up and what would happen to the downstream communities. So many dates were being given by the media. So the manager in this case just used the platform to project the date and time when the reservoir would fill up, and whether with the prevailing river flow and the rainfall, then there was an advisory that needed to be issued. So this was during our launch of the platform behind this gentleman here. And we have a representative from the Ministry of Interior. We have the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. We have the MD for the Nairobi Water Company, and the person now who utilizes this dashboard to determine whether more water needs to go to the treatment. We have experts in hydrology from Jomo Kenyatta University, and of course, those who control the operations of the reservoir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was quite a long one. So we'll go direct to the next. Remember to type your questions in the chat. We'll go to Craig, who is our last presenter for today.
Thank you, Florence, and thank you everyone for coming today. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So today, let me start with a bit of good news and a bit of bad news. First, the bad news. And that is that I'm in the US and it's early in my day, so I'm only half awake. So, but the good news is that in my talk today, it's pretty short, and so you won't have to suffer too long as I sort of bumble through this. So let me start then with some of the biggest challenges in a water fund are collecting data and analyzing this data so you can understand where your project is, and you won't be like it shows in this cartoon. If somebody asks you, is your project in good shape? And if you don't have the data and you haven't done the analysis, you really can't answer that question. So yeah, otherwise you can be just like this cartoon and you just keep going until somebody says to stop. But that's not what we want. So by the end of my talk today, I hope you will have a better understanding of how to do effective data collection and analysis for monitoring evaluation of a water fund or any other project. It all starts with data collection. And we live in a digital world, and when you're thinking about, do you do electronic data collection versus paper data collection, always go with electronic data collection. About 6 years ago, I did a comparison right at when we were thinking about switching over to using tablet-based or smartphone to collect data. And so what I found in this comparison was that on a cost per interview basis, it was 74% less with a electronic survey compared to a paper-based survey. And it was also faster. So if you go electronic, you're going to save yourself some money, you're going to save yourself some time, and it almost always results in higher quality data. So if you're doing electronic data collection, what do you do? What software should you use? Well, all of these software assume that you're going to have smartphones like the ones you can see here, either Apple or Android, or tablets. Same thing, Apple or Android. And I've put a curated list of the four, I think some of the best data collection software packages out there. So these four are all free, and that's a huge plus. There's really no need to pay for data collection software anymore because the free options are so good. And starting at the bottom with ODK, or Open Data Kit, this was created by Google quite a few years ago, and it's still widely used out there. It has the big advantage that it's open source software and you can customize it 100 different ways. And many of the tools that are out there today are built on the ODK platform. So the second one I want to talk about briefly is Survey Solutions. This is the World Bank survey software, and it's by far the most powerful. If you're doing a large survey, you want to use Survey Solutions because it includes modules to help you manage all of the enumerators, the people out there doing the data collection. So it's a very powerful suite of tools for large scale data collection. Epi5 Collect is really easy to use. You can learn it quickly, and it's widely used in the health field. Kobo Toolbox has really come on strong in the last couple of years. And they're now offering to nonprofits free access, and you have some limited data storage, but still it's a lot. And a lot of organizations have switched to this recently. And we just started using it. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we tried it out and we're very impressed. So, any of these four, you're not going to go wrong. So that's how you can decide which software to use for your data collection. Okay, what you want to do is avoid GIGO. And so GIGO is garbage in, garbage out. You absolutely have to clean your data. Yes, electronic data collection should have a lot fewer errors, but even in electronic data collection, you're going to get data entry errors. You're going to get problems with incomplete data. You may even have problems with what are called skip codes, so that sometimes if a person gives a particular answer, it will skip the next question because it's not relevant. And if those skip codes aren't exactly right, you're going to be missing data. And you're only going to find that many times when you actually do your data cleaning. So you've got to do data cleaning, otherwise you're going to have GIGO. Data analysis. So when you're ready for the data analysis, after your cleaning, you've got to choose what software you want to use for your data analysis. And if you're going to learn a data analysis software, there's usually a pretty steep learning curve. So you could learn them all, but it'd be a full-time job for several years. So most people just specialize in one data analysis software package. And I put the big ones up here on the screen. And the place to start is with Excel. It's the most widely used, and you kind of have to know Excel before you can use some of the other ones. They assume a knowledge of Excel in many cases. So Excel is the starting place. Definitely want to learn that. But having gone down this road here for quite a few years now, I've come to the conclusion that the only one that you should really be investing in going forward is learning R. Why R? Just it has so many advantages. But first and foremost, it's free. Yeah, SAS will cost you minimum, if you're like a student, like $2,000. If you're just buying it outright, it's like $6,000. And SAS is the Mercedes of the software packages. It's just got all kinds of amenities that it can do. But R is very, very close now. There are so many modules for R that you can add on. And because it's open source, people are creating new modules all the time. R has the best graphics of any of these programs. When you see those publications that have amazing graphics, they're almost always done in R because it's got such great graphing capabilities. It can link with multiple languages. So for example, there's Swahili versions of R. There's just this huge online community. You can get your questions answered easily. There's tons of online resources. So if you're only going to learn one additional data analysis software beyond Excel, make it R. But if you've already invested in SPSS or Stata or SAS, you're probably better off to stay with those because I say it's a steep learning curve. Okay, so after you've done your data analysis, you've got to change this data from just the analysis into knowledge that people can use. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a graph is worth 1,000 pictures. And John touched on using Power BI for data visualization. And we've been using that a fair bit at the Nature Conservancy. It's an easier one to learn than some of the other ones, but some of the other ones have some advantages. And I just want to highlight a couple of points about these. So I'm starting with Tableau at the bottom. So Tableau has the ability to handle super large data sets. So when you've got millions of records, then Tableau's the one to use. It is amazingly fast with large data sets. Things that would take you hours and hours to analyze in Excel, you can do in seconds in Tableau. So that's, and it's got a lot of users, but it's pretty pricey. It's not a cheap option. Socrata is really good for storytelling. when you want to have both graphs and the text, and you want to do a beautiful layout, Socrata is the tool of choice. Power BI is really good for linking with, it's a Microsoft product, so it links really easily with other Microsoft products. And it's probably the quickest one to learn. So you can just stop at your data analysis and just present the graphs that are, say, you output in R, which are still beautiful. But there's so much more uptake when you use a data visualization package, because you can share the URL. You can share a hyperlink with people that they can click on, and then they can see the dashboard, and you just find that it's a lot more approachable. You're going to get more people uptaking the information than you give them a 20-page report. Okay, last slide here. So to summarize, you do electronic data collection, ensure your data are clean to avoid GIGO, and then do the data analysis and visualization. But let me close with one hard-earned tip. It's easy to get data overload like this cartoon suggests. So when doing your data collection, only collect the elements that you know you're going to need. Don't collect everything that you think would be nice. It magnifies all of the work through the rest of the process, from the data cleaning to the data analysis to the data visualization. So it seems like it would be very low cost to add on a few more indicators, but every one you add is going to add more time when it comes to the rest of the process. So be judicious when you're deciding what kind of data you want to collect, or otherwise your desks may look like this poor person here, where you're overflowing with data. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I think we can now switch to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you
so much, Craig. So Fred.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like, if anybody could unmute themselves for a minute, we just give an applause to the grateful presenters. It's been wonderful talking about data so nicely. So guys, this is your turn. Let's give them an applause. Yes, that was lovely. That's really lovely. And more applause is still coming, so which we appreciate from Eldred there, I see, and from everywhere. So from Warma, Water Resource Authority in Kenya. So thanks very much. You could go back to unmute now. Florence has requested me if I could just coordinate our engagement for this session. A number of questions have come through, and Florence and I will keep each other on check in case connection isn't great. So I will start by harvesting the questions that have come. And they continue coming, and I may not use any particular order, but just to make sure that we cover as much as possible. So if I may start with Hannah. Craig, I don't know whether you've seen the question from Hannah, but she's really asked about, specifically for socioeconomic data, how easy it is to adopt mobile technology for data collection, and if there are limitations to that for socioeconomic community data. Do you want to start that, Craig, off just because you just talked about how nice it is, and I really envy you and the paper. Something about that as we go to Philip Kichuki's questions?
Yeah. So, one of the major challenges that it seems like that would be a problem that is not, is whether or not you have mobile phone coverage. Because all of the data collection packages that I recommended work both online and offline. So even if you don't have complete coverage, you're still fine. Once you do get online, it will automatically upload. And so you can do, one of the restrictions though is that if you're using an ODK based product, because it was developed by Google, it only works on Android phones. So all of the ODK-based data collection software is Android only. So Kobo Toolbox, for example, is Android only. And that's not too much of a limitation usually. And so what we've been doing lately are buying the cheap Chinese Android phones, and you can get these really inexpensively. And they're reliable enough to last for the month or so while you're doing data collection for, say, a household survey, and they're very affordable. So you can get the higher end phones that are going to be, they're more expensive, but the quality out there is pretty decent now. So I'm not sure if that answers all of your question, but I'm happy to go deeper if there's more you want to know.
That's good, and I also saw David SJ also offered a link that can also share some tools there. So Hannah, you can come back if you did not get the answer, but I might now cycle off to Engineer Philip Kichuki. This is our guru with the water utilities management. So you have two questions, Philip. I'll split them between John and Richard. So I'll let Richard answer the first question, which is how frequently a calibration of the ROGAS is done and whether that is adequate to make sure that we eliminate errors. And then after that, John quickly will respond your second question, which is if it is possible to automate the manual gauge reader technology a little bit. Is it possible to digitize that, for example, to make sure that the information recorded goes straight to a database other than sits in a paper for the month, like you said? So Richard Bogani first, and then John.
Okay, thanks, Fred. So the logging equipment that we are using it's the Solence LTC, which is the level, temperature, and the conductivity loggers. So in terms of these loggers monitor the water electrical conductivity. This is a water quality indicator. So in terms of the conductivity, we calibrate these, and it's a quite simple process through the logger software. We calibrate these, say, every 6 months. But the water quality in this area is very good, and we don't interpret it to be significant or expect there to be significant variations in water quality. In terms of the water level of these loggers, we use the gauge plate reading as a check for the water level that's recorded by the loggers. So the gauge plate provides a manual water level reading, and if there is a significant difference between the two, we can then investigate if there's a problem with the logger.
That's great, John. Quick one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, engineer, for that question. So we are working with the Water Resources Authority, and we are using gauge readers, technologies that they have, the simple phones that they have. So what they do is that every morning they read their water levels. They send that as an SMS free of charge to our EcoMobile platform. And from the EcoMobile platform, we can then have them stored either in the DHIS dashboard or as an Excel.
Thank you very much. I had on the call actually Engineer Noel from Water Resource Authority. Noel, are you still there? Would you collaborate in automating or digitizing the manual gauge reader records? If you're there and you can hear me, please, 1 minute. I'm not lucky. No, Dirty is not there. I'll cycle back. So I'll move on to the next question. This is a question asked by Abraham Asefa. You wanted to share a little bit about your experience using R, the software. Do you want to do that over data records, brother? You're on mute, Asefa. Asefa has made a contribution there on chat, but seems he's still on mute. I hope he's not speaking because we can't hear him. Asefa, I'll come back. I'll now cycle all the way to Eldoret. The city of Eldoret, That's one of the newest waterfalls in Africa. Jacqueline had a question. She really wanted to learn from Richard Bugani how to specifically get it right when setting up control, determining which areas are going to be control and which areas are going to be the impact areas, and also how do you avoid noise? How do you make sure that the areas that you left as control remain control? Others do not come in and do even much more impact than you're doing in your impact areas. Richard?
Thanks, Fred, and thanks for the question. So the criteria that we used to select the impact and the control catchments. So obviously, firstly, what we were looking at for is catchments that are densely invaded, so that once the clearing has been undertaken, we can clearly see the response in the discharge from the clearing activities. But we also looked at things like access, because this is a long-term experiment. So I think it will last for several years. So access to maintain, to download the data is very important. Then we also looked at between the two catchments, whether they are of similar size and whether they are of similar shape, because that affects the hydrological response. We looked at the slope, because that also affects the hydrological response. So they should have similar slope. And also things like geology and land use, so that all these things that affect how the catchments respond hydrologically should be similar.
Thank you very much. Asefa, are you unmuted now? I'll skip you, but I still want to hear your experience about using R. So I'll go to a question from Taga Waterford, directed to Lois Abede, and then I'll come back to Mr. Festus. So Lois Abede, the question was whether you have a simple, easy to adopt logical framework model that the team in Taga, the committee in Taga can adopt as they start planning their work within the Zigi River watershed in Tanzania, because when they're starting, they don't have that much money, but they would want to adopt the model of a logical framework for planning the start of intervention. Do you have some response for that?
Thank you very much, Fred. I can share simple guide on how to come up with a logical framework for that particular project. Maybe if they can reach out to me, or if you can give me their email, and then I can help them out with that. Thank you.
Okay, excellent there. So Florence, you make sure that the two are connected. For that, I will have room for 2 more questions. So I'll now cycle to Festus, who had 2 questions. Festus, I'll allow you to ask the questions and I'll guide you on who gives you response. If you can unmute yourself, you have this chance to air your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Frederick, for the opportunity. I'm Festus. I'm in Ghana at the moment, and we are currently working with the TNC to develop a water fund for the first time in Ghana. So it was interesting to see some of the presentations, especially regarding collecting data to monitor the operation of the water fund. So my questions are to ask, I did not hear nitrates and nitrites being monitored as part of the water quality monitoring. And also paying attention, I heard that there are some agricultural activities that go on along the banks of the water bodies. So this could affect the nitrites and nitrate concentration due to fertilizer application. I wanted to know if it's being monitored, or if not, any reasons for that. And also, I may have heard John talk about collecting water quality data only in the rainy season. I may be wrong if I heard him right, but if that is the case, is there any reason why it's done only in the rainy season? And usually if it's done at seasonal intervals, dry and rainy seasons, it helps to compare the data for seasonal differences, right? So I just want to ask these questions. Thank you.
Excellent, very much. And I think we're very happy to hear somebody from Zero GMT from Ghana. So Craig, I might ask you to answer the first question about how deep we go into monitoring agricultural effluent or chemicals. And then I'll ask John to talk about the later part of the question. So Craig, if you can go first.
Yeah, thanks, Festus, and thanks, Fred. Yeah, so we don't monitor nitrates or nitrites unless we know they're a local issue. So we do preliminary water assessments to see if these are problems in the watershed. So in a lot of the areas where we're working in Africa, there's not a lot of fertilizer runoff from the adjacent farms or the farms along the riverbanks. So it hasn't been a major issue for us in the places where we've worked thus far. But that said, I know here in the United States, it's probably the major issue with water quality. And the Nature Conservancy does a lot of work on reducing the runoff of fertilizers in the United States. And much of it is just, the plain and simple providing vegetative riparian strips along riverbanks so that nobody's farming up next to the edge of the river. And that's how a lot of the mitigation measures are done here in the US. But let me pause there and hand it off to John to talk a little bit more about seasonality.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And also to add on what Craig has just said, in our areas, we don't receive so much of those nitrates and nitrates. And you realize that I mentioned of the telemetric equipment that measure electrical conductivity. So this is actually a parameter that will show you the context of the dissolved nutrients in water. And so on average, you'd have less than 20 microsiemens per centimeter of EC, and the recommended for drinking water is less than 500. So we don't really see the need to go ahead and do the nitrates and nitrates because they are not a problem. On the next, on the question on seasonality, yes, we undertake most of our water quality campaigns or measurements during the rain season because we believe that most of these nutrients are washed down to the rivers during the rain season. And so that's why we take most of our turbidity and sediment loading measurements during such seasons. But during the dry season, we would want to see how much the water clarity goes. So we still do some limited measurements on turbidity in dry seasons.
Okay, thank you, John. I have one more question, Craig, for you. We could probably close with this one. And this is from S. Braid. And the question is whether we have a guide for the riparian buffer strips, e.g. the width of vegetation structures and composition. How do we create buffer that are standard from waterfall to waterfall, from river to river, from country to country? Craig, over to you.
Thank you. But Fred, you're the one who should answer this because you have far more experience than I do on establishing buffer strips. But I'll do the first cut at least. So is there a guide? Yeah, there is. It's buried in, it's within a larger guide to sort of different issues in watersheds and how you address them. But we have tremendous experience in the Upper Tana with doing these buffer strips with different kinds of plants. And Fred, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what's been most effective in the Upper Tana for buffer strips.
Thank you very much, Craig. Again, just like Craig, what Craig has said is, in most countries, there is a prescription in the water roll. They tend not to vary too much, but it's good in whatever country you have to check what does the water roll say as a minimum. Many water rolls would say something like a minimum of 6 meters on each side of the river from the highest crest level when the river is full, 6 meters above beyond that. There are some that say from 6 meters all the way to 30 meters, depending again on how wide the river is. There's some that say up to 1 width the width of the river on either side. But the most important thing is to match that with reality. In many places, if you have forest land and communal grazing areas, it's very possible. In highlands, where farmers are farming, it's good to really make them invest in very good intensive use of that piece of land, because it's very competitive land, it's the fertile piece of land, and it's the one closest to the source of water. So what we've done in Tana, I think we have a minimum of 6 meters. And this is very much close to where the farmers are farming. So as a minimum, we start by putting what I'll call permanent vegetation, followed by long-term vegetation. So we start with, for example, Napier grass or Bracharia grass in that area so that it can hold the soil and remove river bank erosion, followed by the function of sieving the water flowing into the river during when it's raining, sieving the soils that are there, the sediments, so that the water can be cleaner as it gets to the river. We follow that up with some tree planting. Depending on dialogue with the farmers, this is always a challenging sometimes, because the farmers don't want to lose this completely, because then they wanted crops. But we've been able to convince them either to put some fruit trees or to put some indigenous trees. In some cases, that becomes full long-term vegetation, that there shall always be long-term vegetation. I'll post there. This guideline is valid, but as a water fund, we provide this in virtually everywhere where we work, so we could share a bit of that information. I'm totally aware that we just 1 minute past the time, and Florence had requested me to make an announcement. So why don't I promise that we will take some time with Florence to go through the questions that were not answered. I think there's one from Mr. Joseph Karajan, Rob Water Company, about hydrology that we'll get Richard Bugani to answer, and a few others, and then we'll get those responses to you, so that we can spare this 1 minute to say thank you, but also to make you an announcement that the next Africa Water Fund Network call will be fire. I think if nothing else, please purpose to be there for the next one. We are likely to have two presidents speaking in the next network call. It will be allowed then September the 21st to the 23rd. Look out for those details. They'll come from Florence, but I promise you the next one will be fire. We'll talk about water security, and we'll even talk about how to fund it, and we'll get the right profile of VIPs in that call. So I'll pause there. I want to take this opportunity. Florence, do we have any other announcement, or should I close it here?
No, we don't have any other announcements. We can close the call today. And thank you all for joining.
And did I close any announcement from the floor? Going on, thank you very much for the compliment, Mr. Kogo in Ghana, Emmanuel, and very other people who've said this. Festus, thank you. Asafa, thank you very much. I think we can close it here, guys. I want to thank you. Keep strong. I'm happy that there's so much results coming from the field. You guys doing a fantastic work. And we should look forward to seeing you in the 3rd week of September. We'll announce the date very soon, and we'll announce the speakers. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. Have a good day, Craig. Have a good afternoon, most of the rest of us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.